Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
Hi, I'm really pleased to welcome you here today, and I love seeing all of you and the fact that we're going to hear from so many people celebrating North Jersey. And this is the kind of event I really love. I mean, I love having Pulitzer Prize winners here too, don't get me wrong, but this is the kind of event I love because it gives a lot of people a chance to be heard by other poets and people who love poetry. I will say that this anthology and this program was really the idea of a committee, which I don't usually work by committee, but this was the idea of a committee. And Mark, I'd like you to come up, please. And Mark and I worked on this project, and we first met with, I can't remember their names, James Marcum of Fairleigh, Dickinson, and Steve Hahn of Paterson, New Jersey, Paterson University, and we discussed the idea of what we could do to celebrate William Carlos Williams and to celebrate North Jersey. And we came up with a lot of different ideas, and one of the ideas we came up with that day was to have a poetry, not exactly a contest, but a call for submissions for poetry on that dealt specifically with North Jersey, the poetry of place. And so Mark and I spent, I think, 2 days going through all the poems that came in. And there were a lot of poems from a lot of sections of the country that came in for this anthology. And then we chose the ones that we felt were the most to the point of what we were trying to do. Mark, would you like to add something to that? No, go ahead.
It's hard to
Mark and I edited this, so I think Mark should have a chance to say something also.
Yeah, and I was, Maria Gillen actually said to me, well, you know, I'd like a photograph of New Jersey.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful?
And I said, what do you mean, a photograph of New Jersey?
Oh
so
no, don't tell me that's my telephone.
You're supposed to turn that on. You're going to get in trouble. Anyway.
This be my daughter.
You want to answer that? You turn it off. So anyway,
I'm very sorry.
no, it's okay. I'm thinking what represents New Jersey, and of course, I think of a diner. When I think of New Jersey, I think of diners. I also think of the turnpike. I think of tolls, things like that. But so I thought, okay, the Bendix Diner, that's a classic. So I spent one day there and part of the evening just taking photographs, and I finally got this photograph. And it's a great diner. It was also used in several movies were shot there. Boys on the Side with Drew Barrymore. The Diner with Paul Reiser and who else was in that? Kevin Bacon. It was about a coming-of-age story in 1959. Was set in the. Is that your phone again? You got to turn it off. Either turn it off or answer it.
You know who it is?
She's the boss. She doesn't have to do anything.
I'm very sorry, Mark.
That's okay. You turned it off, right?
I did. I hope I did.
You don't have two cell phones, do you?
I hope I turned it off. Did I turn it off? How many kids do you have?
Hey, John, you get? This is a movie. Yeah, I like this one. Okay. So anyway, that's the image for the anthology. And there's a blind waiter at the Bendix. His name is David. He's very famous. I don't know how he does it, but he manages to find you after he takes your order. You know, so it's got the original grease from 1947. It used to be. It's on Route 17 North in Hasbrook Heights, just before it intersects with Route 46. And it was named after the Bendix, well, the Bendix plant, the aeronautics plant, was right nearby Teterboro Airport. They closed a few years ago. A lot of the Bendix workers would go to have lunch and dinner here, breakfast. So that's the history of the diner.
That's the history of the diner.
Anyway.
And the photograph came reproduced. Mark is a wonderful photographer. If you ever get a chance to go to one of his art shows, his photography is really, really fantastic. And this, when you look at this and see the detail on this diner, you'll see how good he is as a photographer.
You can even read the menu if you get a magnifying glass.
That's so cute. Anyway, I guess that's about it. It's just that it was interesting to work with another editor who isn't my daughter, which is usually the person I edit things with. So it was very interesting to work with Mark in choosing these poems, and some of the poems that we didn't take were very good poems. They just didn't fit particularly with what we thought the theme of this anthology should be. So I'm going to stop talking. I guess we can stop talking, and we'll start. We're going to do this alphabetically, and we'll ask you to come up and read your poem from the anthology. I hope you all got your copy of the anthology. I also hope that you'll buy extra copies to give away as presents, and you'll talk it up, because this was very expensive to produce. So, you know, we need you to buy some copies, okay? Is Svea here? Svea? She's not here yet. Okay. Laura, you're here, aren't you? Oh, she's right over there. Okay. Let's start with Laura Boss from the Poetry of Place, North Jersey, in poetry, an anthology celebrating the poetry of William Carlos Williams, edited by Maria Gillen and Mark Hillingham.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Maria. And thank you, William Carlos Williams, for all your poems. Really happy to be in this with so many poets I really respect and love. I used to live in North Caldwell, and this is about a street in North Caldwell. Mountain Avenue, North Caldwell. Years ago, driving up the winding mountain road, away from all the bumper-to-bumper traffic I had just left on Pompton Avenue and earlier on Route 46 West rush hour, I suddenly had a sense of escaping not just the bad-tempered drivers honking in frustration. I wasn't so pure myself in that area, and it wasn't just the lack of traffic as the road spiraled up between the walls of stone, evergreens and crimson king maples and huge trees set behind the cliffs. I circled higher and higher, as if even the air were fresher the higher I drove, as if I were climbing to a kind of fairyland and all that was missing was a castle with turrets and a prince waiting, which probably was doubtful since I was a 21-year-old pregnant woman with a husband and one-year marriage. That day, I fell in love with a town, or maybe it was just a road that seemed to have the power to wipe out all the stress of the day just by driving up it, just by its natural physical beauty. I decided that was where I wanted to live, to drive up that spiraling road each day to what seemed serenity from day-to-day frustrations. My husband, whom I considered quite old at 22, and I had visited many towns in Essex and Passaic County, searching for a place that could be permanent. I still believed in the word permanent so many years ago. Unlike our tiny garden apartment in Rutherford, and now, decades later, I see a rerun of The Sopranos, which I never saw when it was on HBO, and tonight I watched Tony Soprano leave the Lincoln Tunnel, head south on the turnpike, past the bridge near what looks to me like the Pulaski Skyway, past the oil refineries that don't pollute as they once did, unless you count visual pollution, past the ancient brick walk-up apartments and often neglected treeless houses of struggling residents, past Chianchi Street in Paterson and Lou Costello's statue, past what looks like Belleville streets or Nutley's or Verona's, all almost interchangeable at times. But when Tony Soprano starts up Mountain Avenue in North Caldwell and she drives up that familiar curving road as I once did, I feel the same sense of leaving stress on some littered highway a mile below, rushing through me, as I'm sure Tony does, even though it's TV, even though it's imaginary, as perhaps in a way it always was. Thank you.
Drew my phone in the bottle of the water. I think I'm jinxed today. Evil eye, evil eye. Okay, our next writer is Mark Brunetti, and his poem is Homelessness in New Jersey. Come on up, Mark.
Hey, I'm Mark. I also make the Idiom magazine, www.idiommag for the camera. So I wrote this one after going to see a groundhog last year. I've been telling people that I was homeless for that February. So homelessness in New Jersey. My idea of homelessness came from cartoons. A happy character with a stick and a polka dot handkerchief tied to the end to hold all his worldly possessions. I first attempted to be homeless when I was 7 years old, living in Jackson, New Jersey. I packed up a comic book and a jacket, took some cheese and crackers from my mom's fridge, and walked to the clubhouse in my backyard. It had its own imitation kitchen with a stove and plastic red doors. I stayed there for at least 4 or 5 hours, looking at the pictures in my comic book, trying to find things to do to bide my time. The cheese and crackers were gone by evening, and it got dark quick, and I was scared of the dark. Now I'm 26 years old and I have a car and a nice state job with benefits up in Cranford. Because my car works, I'm considered to be an upper class person without a home. And since I'm pursuing my master's degree, I'll have plenty of things to do to take up my time. When I was younger and homeless, I went back home because it was dark and my mom called me in. Now I have a flashlight on my keychain and I don't think I'm going to listen when she calls because I want to see the sunrise. Thank you.
Okay, our next writer is Mr. Anthony Buccino, and his poem is called Paterson. Let's welcome Anthony.
If you park down the street in the designated lot, you probably passed the spot where this occurred in November. In a vacant parking lot on a Saturday at noon on Ellison Street, between Hamilton House and Hamilton Club, a pigeon wrestled with the bony remains of a fried chicken wing. It's like a cow eating a hamburger, I thought. Then I thought of my father and his long tie-up with the Boyds, and it seemed to me that he was here as I set a course for a new loft, when I should have been home writing the story of his long-lost letters. I think the bird was saying, for my father, that he now understands, or that I always will be picking at bones if I keep up with these poems and poetry. But as a rule, as he would say, either way, you'll come out okay. Thank you.
Okay, our next reader is Lori Byro, and she's going to read a poem called Bertrand's Island. And I don't know how many of you remember Bertrand's Island. I think I was there about 25 years ago, or maybe even 35 years ago. How long has it been closed, Lori? Do you know? 20 years? Okay. Lori Byro, Bertrand's Island.
I wanted to thank Mark for being my best teacher. Bertrand's Island. When they dismantled all the wood that made up the depth of people's anxiety, the roller coaster that seemed to groan with the weight of all that fear, not safe, gonna crash one day and kill people. It was like trying to pull the teeth from an alligator. I feel its sadness, that old monster, built before fax machines and the World Wide Web, making us breathless as lovers when we kiss, white-knuckled passion as our fears disappear into the darkness, where stars send signals that something is happening below. Why else all that screaming? Why else all that laughter and joy? If I think carefully back to my 13th summer, I can remember the order of the rides, the popcorn my friends and I share, the cotton candy, sweet and light as we are at that age, and the boys we cry over, and the ones we let down our shirts. I wonder which of us are married or divorced, dead now or alive, at that moment when the night blows our screams like kisses up to the moon, before life became so complicated and we all knew then for certain why we were screaming. Thank you.
That's great.
Can you just-
He's gonna give me a microphone so I don't have to do the only exercise I'll probably do for the next year anyhow. Okay? He's laughing. I tell the truth. It might not be very pleasant. All right, but while you're getting me a microphone, I'm gonna get back up here and call for Robert Carnevale, who wrote a poem called Hickory Road, and let's welcome Robert Carnevale. Thank you, Steve.
Hello, hello. Well, I grew up a few miles from here, but this poem comes from Sussex County, where I live now. You've probably driven up there at some point or another. The welcoming sign gives you the motto of the county, man and nature together. You might think a while about what that means. Have you ever seen them apart? One clue about what it means, I think, there's one particular development in Sussex County that I think really sums up what they mean by man and nature together. It's called Mallard Run. Mallard Run.
Better run.
Well, Hickory Road is the road at the end of the road Denise and I live on. When we moved, it was a dirt road. Now it's paved in kind of a half-hearted way. And it's called Hickory Road because there are these beautiful shagbark hickories lining a section of it. The shagbark hickory is the tree you see in Grimm's fairy tales when the children are wandering through the Black Forest and there's this shaggy, shaggy tree. That's the, well, actually maybe there's some different sort in Germany, but the shagbark hickory is the tree we have here that reminds you of that. After we'd lived there about 10 years, the land that some of these shagbarks are on was staked for surveying. And so far, they haven't been, none of them have been cut down. So far, nothing has happened, but I started to worry about it. And one day, I got over my worries, and this poem records that day, Hickory Road. I went to visit the shagbarks today, and suddenly saw they're in no trouble, will not miss themselves, have never had any intention of sticking it out to the end. What rolls out a surface so rich, what they reach so straight up to, is not anything more or different than deep leaf mold or the blue sky. Growing is not the same as rotting, rotting not just more growing, but you will never prize them apart. The end is already cocked inside hunger, so all this hunger men feel past the end is just fear living its cover. Look, to the shagbarks all is transparent. No matter how shaggy they get, drag in the worst string theory nightmare, they can never be lost to themselves. Their minds have no sheaths no sleeves, no pockets. Their hearts have no caves, no volcanoes. Their mind is this place where they live, and their heart this time when they live there. Now, as we stand, breathing by turns, on what those who can, if they wish, leave it behind, even forget it, have come to call Hickory Road.
Philip Jafari, Meadowlands by Starlight.
Over the years, I've come to appreciate different habitats that when I was younger I tended to ignore or dismiss. And having traveled so many times over the Meadowlands, I always thought it was a place just to get through, fast. And last summer, I had the opportunity to take a boat trip through the Meadowlands, which is sponsored by the Hackensack River Keeper. And you really see things that you never could appreciate from a distance. So that was kind of the genesis of this poem. Meadowlands by Starlight. I'm not much of a talker, she tells me the first time we meet. Her features hard, pointed, shoulders taut and tough as any man's, mouth drawn tight in concentration as she hoses down the deck of a yacht. You have a boat here, she asks, in the marina? But I don't. I'm just a guy looking for a story. What kind of story? What kind you got? Dusk, in a pontoon boat, she takes me into the marsh. Coves and lagoons, reeds taller than a man, the swamps in recovery, she tells me. Striped bass are back, bluefish too. She points out flocks of sandpipers, tanagers, a lone black-crowned night heron resting on the mudflats. She talks non-stop now, showing me the kinds of plants, blackgrass and ditchgrass and salt meadow cordgrass, smooth and lush and thick as carpet, baby soft. Her face softens too, seems less severe, set free. She cuts the engine. In the gathering dark, we drift beneath new stars. On her lips, not quite a smile, but the promise of one. From the highway, she says, this looks like nothing, a place to dump old tires, pave over for a mall. But when you get down in here, when you get real close, beauty takes you by surprise. Thank you.
I'm going to say that I'm not reading the bios of people because I think it's more important to hear the poems. And you could read the bios in the book and find out where people come from and where they teach or if they teach or not. That's not important. What's important is the poems themselves. And I think we know that from listening to the poems we've listened to so far. Doris Di Savino, November, Grand Street, Paterson. Here?
It's neither one out there. No, she's not here?
I thought I saw somebody get up. Did you? All righty. Andrew Fader, Saturday Night in Pigtown. I love that. Saturday Night in Pigtown.
Hello. This is Saturday Night in Pigtown. Yellow light from the Rexall spilled onto the sidewalk, onto us, as we stood, shifting on sore feet. Saturday night in Dover, how grand, standing around.
Down on Brown, more wood frame two-families, with narrow alleys opening onto backyard explosions of tulip gardens and postcard lawns. and on the corner, above blasting bake ovens, our own mighty fortress against the sins of the fathers. Thank you.
Marilyn Gelman, funeral director in a Fairleigh diner.
I dedicate this reading to my son and granddaughter who are here with me. I saw the funeral director in the diner today. He and his family buried my family's dead, except for my younger son. The director remembered me and my mom, where she worked and when. I remember him telling me how gently he prepared her. The funeral home is on the main road between the city where I was born and where I live now, on the border of existence between life and memoriam. I've sat in its chapel for neighbors and in-laws, shook hands and kissed cheeks, wondered what connections drew unexpected faces. The hallways are dim. Decorative rocks in a pool extend from dark corners under stairs. And as my mother's friends, the deaf and the vision impaired, made their way through that place, they tripped, almost falling but catching each other. They had so little notice of this day, despite months of anticipation. My son's wife did not use this funeral director, did not bury him where other family rested. I joked my fear that she would cremate him, scatter him mixed with herbal tea leaves on a Catskill mountaintop or a faraway lake. Almost by accident and by last-minute choice, he landed in a grave near places he loved and people who loved him. At his burial, I covered his casket with dirt and rocks, taking care not to break it.
Kathleen Gerard, Bliss.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here with so many writers and poets I really admire, especially Philip Chafari, who I studied with for so many years, and he continues to be such an inspiration to me. So thank you for including me. My poem is called Bliss, One Day in the Life of an Assisted Sunrise Living Center of Northern New Jersey. There were certain things they could count on the first Wednesday of each month: a clean denture cup waiting on their nightstands, a crimped paper bag of toiletries filled with things like shampoo and talcum, mouthwash and hand cream. They could count on Patrick Fitzgibbons, his lovelorn shrieks for his wife that pierced the dawn, Mary Ann Murata's slippers pacing the floor in the hallway, and Luann Clear and Jacob Dash could always count on their greeting of good morning, said to each other with a glint of surprise that they both wiped another night's sleep from their eyes. There was bathing at 7, breakfast at 8, television from 9 till noon, although some folks like Luann Clear and Jacob Dash, they were never amused by Regis Philbin. That left the two of them in wicker chairs on opposite sides of the day room to sip tea, pencil the crossword, and steal an occasional glance. There was lunch from 12 to 1, Bronislaw Dinkins, he slurped his soup. Nap time from 1 to 2, Marilyn James passed gas and grit her teeth. Sing-alongs from 2 to 3, Valine Katz pounded her cane upon the parlor floor and belted it out like a tone-deaf Judy Garland. But it was recreation from 3 to 5 that most folks liked best, although Luann Clear and Jacob Dash, they didn't care much for cribbage. They never took to gin or bridge and laid lost hard at prompting their opponents of who had the next move in checkers. Gardening is what lured Luann Clear and Jacob Dash. They both loved flowers and the idea of planting seeds in the earth they'd one day be a part of. They grew fond of that greenhouse, rising beyond the roses near a thicket of evergreen trees that bordered Route 17, the park and ride terminal on the other side, the anxious roar of buses. It wasn't until Jacob Dash tripped on a hose and brushed against Luann Clear that the two of them decided, unspoken. Together they traipsed through traces of dusk, the door to the greenhouse flung open, the trail of their laughter swept up in the breeze. Through the thicket they boarded the 958 to New York City. Short of breath, they escaped the routine. Thank you. Thank you so much.
The next poet is Maria Gillen, and the poem is City of Memory, Paterson. The city of memory, Paterson, its sky lavender and purple at dusk, the hills above it, Garrett Mountain with its dark face, and Lambert Castle looking down over the city, its parking lot, the lookout we used to park in when I was in school. The stars over the city, the lights of its buildings, the shadow of New York City in the background, while the windows steamed up with our quick breathing. The city today, when I drive down River Street past Our Lady of Lourdes and the red, white, and blue thrift shop, walk to my building from the lot, past the bail bondsman signs and travel agents with signs in Spanish and a flower shop sporting Spanish words in the windows, past the men in the halfway house next to our building, toothless men who have the look of old drunks. The city-looking young men, their eyes shifting, their hands hanging empty at their sides. This house, sad and decrepit, where jazz music streams out of the open window each morning. At noon, I walk back out of my building down Ellison to Maine, where the stores of my youth are gone, replaced by signs that shout dollar store and bargain or final going out of business sale, and where in front of each store sits one man on a high ladder to watch the people going in and out of the store to make sure they aren't stealing anything, and the clerks who are rude to their customers because they are poor. And I remember Paterson when I was young. Meyer Brothers department store with its lovely displays, Chanel No. 5 perfumes, Naturalizer shoes, creamy leather handbags, its elevator operators who wore white gloves and announced the merchandise on each floor, and Quackenbush's department store, not as fancy as Meyer Brothers, but almost, where sometimes we'd stop in the restaurant at the bottom of the curved stair and have an ice cream sundae, though that was later when I was already grown up. And not when I was still a child. My mother would take the three of us, my brother, sister, and I, downtown while she bought freshly ground coffee in the coffee store and went to pay on time for a refrigerator at Quackenbush's. When I'd speak to my mother in Italian, she'd say, shh. People would pass and say, why don't they speak English? They should go back where they come from, as they do now when people speaking Spanish or Arabic pass by. Once, when I was a teenager, I went to Quackenbush's with my mother when she was trying to buy support hose, and the clerk was rude and insulting to her. And I stepped in, my voice raised, my arms on my hips, and said, don't you ever speak to my mother or any other customer like that again. I want to speak to the manager. My mother pulled on my arm, saying, shh, but I wouldn't stop, fury like molten lava taking over my body, my mind, at all the injustice in the world, at the way being poor and foreign is a crime, and the way the poor take it, think they don't deserve anything better, saying shh to their children whose rage finally refuses to be silenced. Our next poet is James D. Quinn, and the poem is called The Main Line.
Hi, I want to say thank you for including me. This poem has 4 sections in it, and I'm just going to pause between the sections rather than number them out loud. The main line. K9 at the train station. The cop works him past the commuter lineup. We are all suspects, and just briefly less concerned when we see the dog is looking for a place to pee. The train slow from station to station, slower yet through the meadowlands, 2 bridges and a tunnel up ahead. The engineer peering at the tracks for brakes or for something else. $21.15 union scale. Homeland Security says it's an engineer's duty and pays him 0. My notebooks and the folders with other poems I want to work on make my backpack bulge. I stuff them all back in at the terminal, remembering to take my sandwich bag, which is small enough for a normal appetite, but large enough to make it seem suspicious. Shifting handholds in the crowded PATH train, saris and small talk over the rush of wheels, newspapers folded to fit commuter space, printed email and library books, other faces, Thursday stares. There's coffee, smell, and smears of a jelly donut on her mouth, and before her stop, she puts on a game face, ready for whatever streets there are. He steals a kiss and grabs her close one more time.
Our next poet is William J. Higginson, and his poem is called Newark to Paterson.
What a wonderful polyglot of commuter cars and trains, and here we are with buses. It's from a longer piece called Busing, New Jersey. I slip earbuds into the porches of my ears, and Bach slides with me out of Newark in another direction, past the park in Bloomfield and the high school with its addition rising as I read of Plato's cave, that lair of everyday life, and the transcendent grove of academe. This is the real life of a bus ride, immersed in a soaring partita and the diabolical republic where only the good get to decide how to live and everyone else just plods on through days of labor supporting it all and nights of debauchery forgetting it all. Clifton, its rows of lawn-aproned homes, so nearly the same in late morning sun. And suddenly it's glittering downtown Paterson, Main and Market, where I swing to the ground, walk past the shops spilling cheap jewelry onto the street in front of the otherwise empty building where Keith Keller used to paint carnivals and circuses full of boobs and butts in his third-floor loft, and taught the street kids Taekwondo so long as they cleaned and polished his floors. I walk past the narrow entrance of Hamilton Street, go back to inspect the building where my old cats, Smoke and Kaji, Japanese for conflagration, were born, rescued from the fire by their owner Mike, who climbed down the fire department ladder, the whole litter in a box in his arms, their mother clinging by her claws to his back. Where Keith, his friend, the painter Gilbert Ryu, and Keith's Playboy bunny girlfriend Linda ran a coffee house, and I drank free so long as I supplied my 3 blends of herbal teas compounded from the bounty of the import shops over on my side of town. Now it houses an Hispanic sandwich shop, the bar next door with the flag of a Central American country still in its window. On the other side of Main, a couple of doors from Market, La Vie en Rose continues to sell alcoholic beverages only to those with ID. With Keller's painting of the interior in mind, I forego a midday beer and head in the other direction. On up Market, I stare at the yards of black wire mesh disfiguring City Hall Tower there to prevent the more common disfigurement of white pigeon droppings. Down the block, McDonald's serves me a grilled chicken club sandwich and a Coke, no fries. I should have gone to the Hispanic sandwich shop around the corner. Stepping out quickly with only a half hour before my next bus leaves, I pace my old downtown haunts, the post office with its ever-gray interior light, no matter how glorious the shining sun and blue skies outside. The bebop bustle of the students around the steps of Passaic County Community College and Lower Broadway, where I used to live across the street from the old Call building and Hung's Chinese restaurant. The restaurant's gone. The school-aged daughters who used to do their homework between customers now perhaps running their own Chinese restaurants in more affluent suburbs, or babysitting their first grandkids, while their children ride commuter buses to dentists' and lawyers' offices, rising with the American dream from these dusty streets full of trinkets for the poor. A small tin sign tacked on the lintel over the boarded-up door of the Call building says it all. Silver letters surrounded in blood red, El amor de Dios es eterno. But now I hike nearly to the end of Broadway, the sign of the Salvation Army thrift shop still beckoning in the distance as I turn in at the Paterson bus station and find a men's room.
And next is Mark Hillinghouse, and his poem is called Woolworths.
It's nice to hear those names. Thank you. Bill Dickinson mentioned Keith Keller, Gilbert Rio, and Linda. I knew all these people. And sometimes I would even end up at La Vie en Rose. You know, you don't want to end up there. Woolworths. It's funny when something that's been around 100 years and it forms sort of an anchor of your memory is no longer around. My mother used to drag me to Woolworths when I was a little kid, and I get lost in the pet shop section with the fish and the hamsters, and I'd always get a pretzel. And it closed a few years back. There was one here, it was on the corner, and down the block was the Social Security office, and every Thursday Woolworths would cash welfare checks, so there'd be a line of women going around the block to cash their welfare checks. So, and that's something that that image has always been in my mind. And of course, walking around, being in Paterson for many years and just walking around the city and seeing the different changes and hearing things. A kid yells "motherfucker" out the school bus window. I don't think anyone notices the afternoon clouds turning pink along the horizon, sunlight dripping down the stone facades, the painted names of the old stores fading above the street, above the spandex women who adjust their prize buttocks, sweating in the sun as I wonder how this city that has no more memory of itself than a river has of rain survives. Is it just a matter of time, or that peasant woman who tugs my sleeve, demanding peseta from every passing stranger? I can still smell the hot dog counter and the pretzel carousel. I love the sounds of birds as I entered, the watery bubbles from aquarium filters over by the plants. If I imagined as a child walking again with my mother, the store-part rainforest, and closed my eyes, I was in some tropical country, that feathered blue against the orange of forgotten sunsets. After the rain-washed streets erased the footprints of tired mothers who waited in long lines under the red and gold awning to cash their welfare checks. And maybe we're all feeling the same rage, seeing the upturned fish tanks stacked against the parakeet cages, sunlight catching on the twisted wire between the shabbiness of an emptied storefront, rays of sunlight poking in, to finger the dusty hollowness of barren shelves. Or maybe it's the cheap plexiglass above the Chinese lettering, or the sound of car alarms blaring. Just the memory of walking down these aisles, like everything else in this city that finally closes. I exit and walk down Main Street, trying to regain my balance, behind the men who walk home from sweaty jobs with clenched fists, and the women who follow them, pulling their children like dogs in the rain. Thank you.
Janet Colstein. Janet here? And Janet's poem is called You Think. Let's welcome Janet Colstein.
You'd think. You'd think a poem about a deer lying dead on River Road could stir up feelings of regret. Something simple about nature and the encroachment of man, about trees and bulldozers and the loss of open land. You'd think because I saw a deer the day before, I believed this was the creature glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, standing motionless against a tangle of tawny branches, where in Edgewater, old growth is an oxymoron. You'd think intersecting roots of asphalt and tar stand for commerce and prosperity, for vehicular traffic that is fast and efficient, that deer are only dirt-covered carriers of disease-causing ticks who need to be culled. You'd think the sight of 4 teenage boys studying the carcass would bring to mind young soldiers in Iraq who wear camouflage suits to appear invisible. And you wonder if they ever see themselves as the deer. You'd think I could tailgate a run-of-the-mill incident of roadkill, barreling down on oil and profits with fast, clean lines of rush hour rhetoric, swerving around potholes filled with quicksand, and averting my peripheral view from dark, liquid eyes blinded by progress. You'd think I would find something profound to say about war and butchery and collateral damage, about construction and cars and the GNP, about running out of options and losing your home, about running towards the river and losing your life.
Let's welcome our next poet, Michelle Lerner, and her poem is called Peripheral Vision.
This poem's about Warren Township in New Jersey, where I grew up, but it could be about a lot of places in New Jersey. Peripheral vision. When I think of the town I grew up in, I think of the woods at the end of my street, trailless and dark with the shade of 100-year-old trees, breaking into patches of sunlight thick with raspberry bushes, dimpled black and red fruits, hanging tantalizingly among the thorns. I still think of the dairy farm split in half by Old Mount Horeb Road, where the 90-year-old farmer, small and hunched over, crossed the road slowly, a pail in each hand. The cows sometimes got out of their field on the south side of the road, went wandering along the yellow line until the farmer chased them back slowly with a stick. No one worried or in a rush, just one of the ways they enjoyed each other's company. Next to the farmer's house was a pasture where a donkey lived with a flock of sheep. He always looked content if slightly confused, an accidental shepherd, the tips of his ears rising 2 feet above his flock. Although it has been at least 10 years since the donkey gave up his land to the mini mansion with the postage stamp lawn, I can see him standing there so clearly, and I can never remember the color of the house that took his place. Every farm, every field, every acre of woods in my hometown has given way to large houses standing next to each other, elbows distance apart, as if lining up in a pageant, preening themselves for passers-by, a new bathroom and garage for every tree that stood. At first, my parents would not take the roads through the new developments, though they were shortcuts to the main road leading out of town. We drove the old country roads not yet developed, the radio up loud, not looking left or right. We did not shop the strip malls popping up like pimples on the edge of town, bringing traffic lights and 4-lane roads to a town where tractors still drove among the Audis and the SUVs. We would not change. We would wait until the houses would fall down, would be displaced by new growth of raspberries and trees, the way houses had displaced the donkey and the cows. We were patient, we thought, but did not count on landscapers arriving in caravans, on driveway lights and swimming pools filled even during droughts. I went away to college and beyond, and my parents grew tired of waiting when even the old roads sprouted houses the size of banks. They began to take the shortcuts out of town, enjoyed Thai restaurants and decent haircuts, hired men to mow the lawn and trim the branches of their trees. They invested in a shopping mall that was the graveyard of a cornfield and watched with resignation as their own road was extended into the woods at the end of the block, falling trees making way for sunlight for the first time in a century, the teeth of the machines cutting through the land, leaving the deer to graze like horses on the lawns in full daylight. The town that I grew up in, living on only in my peripheral vision, where the cows still cross the road at will. Thanks.